Welcome to Mission Ignition, the new leadership development podcast from Catalyzer and Catalyzer Media, organized to introduce you to our team and our approach to igniting leadership growth in your organization. I'm Steve Ingalls, President, CEO at Catalyzer, and we're excited to share another episode with you.
Well, good morning. I finally made my way home here to eastern Kansas, sitting in the intergalactic headquarters of Catalyzer and another edition of Mission Ignition. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Aza and I have known each other for quite some time now. In fact, as we were sharing before we got on the podcast, that if I look at the relationships that Catalyzer has enjoyed over our history, and especially the list of active relationships now, Aza Bittinger at CBAO, the Community Bankers Association of Ohio, is at the very top of the list. We first met them in January of 2016. But I'll let that story unfold as we get into the discussion today. But I'm pleased to be joined by Aza Bittinger. Aza is the lead for CBAO. I'll let him give you his specific title and his responsibilities there with the organization and tell you a little bit about them. But Aza, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Steve. How are you today?
Good. I'm terrific. And it looks like you got a lovely day in northern Columbus.
Yes, beautiful day. We're ready. Fall season is upon us, as well as college football. So we're looking forward to the nice Labor Day weekend.
We are college football time. And as we were noting to one another, we do have our sports garb on today. Aza with his Buckeyes garb and me with my Chiefs garb. So I'm looking forward to this. I'll be interested in some of your perspectives. We've talked pretty regularly over time, but it's been some time, about 8 months since we sat down, and I was in Columbus for your HR conference this year. So give me a little bit about your role at CBAO, your official title, and then if I was you, I'd truly take the opportunity to brag a little bit about the organization and your big anniversary this year.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's see. Well, Aza Bittinger Jr., President, CEO, been serving in this role for the past little over 2 years now, after working through a leadership succession plan with our predecessor who had been here for a little more than 20 years, Bob Palmer. So excited to lead the organization in this capacity. My vision for the organization, for the association representing the community banks of Ohio, is for us to very simply, 3 words, lead the industry. It's very important for us as an association to lead the industry, because if we are not leading our members, and that would be our financial members representing the community banks, as well as the associate members who offer a product or a service to those community banks, if we're not leading the industry, then we have a diminished value to our membership base. And so that's first and foremost our mission. If we take a look at what CBAO has achieved over the last 50 years, founded in 1974, as we just celebrated our 50th annual convention about 3.5-4 weeks ago now, I had a chance to read through some of the old minutes and archives. What was the precipitous to create an association back in the early 70s, in 1973 and 74, before they formed? And at that time, about 9 community bankers gathered, and they were concerned about a variety of pressing issues in the industry at the time. One was competitive pricing for products and services, but also they felt that the other organizations in the state were not advocating for them at the legislature, at the state house or in D.C. And so they felt like they were being overlooked. And the third piece was that they were threatened by consolidation in the industry. At the time, Ohio had a little over 490 community banks in Ohio, and about 375 of those of which were independently owned and operated or family owned and operated. So the times have changed a little bit, but it's interesting. Many of the things that were pressing the industry leaders and stakeholders back then, 50 years ago, industry consolidation, are still here today.
Right.
So it underscores that cliche. As much as things change, they still stay the same.
Sure. How many community banks are there in the state now?
Right now, we're floating right around about a little over 150 community banks. So if we aggregate those community banks from a deposit base, that will be right around about $110 billion for those 150 community banks. The interesting piece is 78% of our Ohio community banks are more than 100 years old, which is absolutely staggering. And that goes to underscore our mission which is to support the independence of community banks in the state.
That's helpful. As we got into this business, again, 15 years ago ourselves, the very first organization to ever hire us was a community bank. We loved them. Consumers National Bank, Minerva, Ohio, Ralph Lober, Lori McClellan have always been very, very, very kind to us. So good morning to you both if you're listening. But we didn't appreciate the distinction between community banks and other types of financial institutions. For someone that may not have any idea what we're talking about, could you give us a little bit of differentiation between what is a community bank compared to a credit union or a bank like Fifth Third or Key, which are sprinkled about Ohio? Give us a little bit of that.
Sure. Banks are large and small in size, but in a nutshell, community banks are locally owned and operated, but also the decision-making is local. Over the last 2 weeks even, I've had a chance to visit a dozen community banks all over the state of Ohio. And one of the things you'll find with a community bank is when you walk into the lobby, the president or CEO is their office is right there off of the lobby.
Yep.
So you can see them when you walk. They're available to answer your questions, to make a decision on a loan. They're not lost in some 30-story ivory tower in a city far, far away in a different zip code. So first and foremost, it's local decision-making in that local market because they like taking care of and they take pride in taking care of their customers, their small businesses, the city schools, the township. I know one of our bankers just retired not too long ago, and he spent 38 years in that market. He referred me to a small business in town to get a few items for silent auction. I said, yeah, by the way, Tom sent me it. Oh, Tom's my neighbor. And that is community banking right there.
In this bigger, consolidated, fast-moving world, make a case for community banking, because I'm going to wonder as I walk into a small bank, we giggle a little bit about this just because the biggest bank we work with happens to sit in a one-stoplight town where there are 3 places where you can eat. One of them's a pizza joint, one of them's a breakfast diner, and the other place to eat there is if you like fried chicken served in one of those big presentation containers at a gas station, go there. Where does community banking sit in terms of the contemporary culture?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve, because it's often lost in the general public in terms of an understanding of it. And part of it is what we are not. You know, super regional banks, whether you're looking at Huntington Chase, Key, PNC, or any Wells Fargo or Bank of America, they have their place in the market. However, they are not available to get an immediate answer. If you want to have an argument with a chatbot somewhere, certainly give them a call. But if you want to talk to a decision maker at a community bank, then you need to work with a community bank. The other piece is, another analogy possibly is a comparison between your large grocery stores and a local farmer's market. If you go to a local farmer's market, oftentimes you may be speaking to the farmer themselves. The product is going to be a lot fresher. If you're picking up fruits or vegetables, they're going to last a lot longer in your home or in your kitchen or in your refrigerator, as opposed to maybe only 2 or 3 days because of the time it took to transport the goods to you through that grocery store. So community banks would be the equivalent of a farmer's market where you are doing business locally with people that you may know in your local neighborhood or county.
And yet, just to take on the case of community bankers for community bankers, it's not exactly like a farmer's market where I then still have to go to the grocery store to get the aluminum foil and the paper plates. These are full service institutions. I don't have to piece together a collection of financial organizations with which I, handle my money or deal with my business. They're fully capable of doing all of that with the kind of personal touch that you're going to get even if you just had another product of theirs. Is that a fair thing to say, or am I being delusional again because I've been brainwashed by you guys for the last 8.60 years?
That is very accurate. The other benefit with the community banks is community banks, and it doesn't matter if you go back to the 70s or even before, community banks, because of their size and their scale, they tend to be your innovators and your early adopters.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a look at the old DOS systems or ATMs, automated teller machines, when they first rolled out, your community banks are going to be your early adopters and innovators. And the one bank that you referenced with the 3 restaurants and the diner that has the great apple pie, they are an innovator and industry leader in the entire landscape of banking, not just community banking. So our community banks are innovators and early adopters in many cases.
I could talk about community banking all day. I find the whole thing fascinating, frankly. I think I told you, or maybe I didn't tell you, we stumbled across a true de novo bank, to drop a name and a term that maybe not everybody's familiar with. I mean, truly white buffalo kinds of stuff. And as they're describing themselves to me, among the things, the characteristics that they talked about were walking in the front door and seeing a bank executive sitting right there that I can engage with directly, rather than, walking up the beautifully laid out staircase to an executive suite, having to get buzzed into a collection of offices. Now, truly, I'm not disparaging larger banks in the process of describing that, but there is a more direct familial kind of relationship that's proffered by community banks, and arguably their differentiator, which is one of the reasons that Catalyzer is kind of keen on community banks. That's the way that we approach business as well. And to go back to our relationship, without getting too obsequious here, I'd be interested in your perspective on this long-standing relationship that we've had with CBAO, 8.6 years, starting with Bob Palmer and working through him trying to engage with us in a way that was healthy for the association and for us. We see you all almost every year, multiple times. I look at the top 5 relationships in terms of longevity. 4 of them are with banking, community banking entities. Talk to me about how you see us in comparison or contrast to how you see your association's membership.
From a membership perspective, we have members both on the financial member side, which would represent the community banks, and then associate members, where we have about 120 that sell a product or a service. And those services could be anything from consulting services to ATMs, ITMs, cash management services, office supplies, any number of products or services. But the one thing I like about working with you guys in particular is that you are a leader in the industry, and not everyone can say that, because you are very engaging and thought-provoking to the madness of the method, if that makes any sense, and in terms of challenging the banks to be looking forward and not passive in their engagement or innovation or even leadership skills in terms of developing the next generation of talent.
And yet, as you said, there's 150-ish community banks in Ohio. Did I hear that right?
Correct.
And we've got that many, maybe that many that have engaged us out of your association. Not every member. Is every member, community bank, a member of CBAO in Ohio?
They're not. They are not. So our membership represents today maybe about 57% of the community banks in Ohio. So we would love to have all community banks be a member of CBAO, and all are welcome, but that's a personal choice they make. And a lot of times that's why we are striving to provide maximum value to give them an opportunity to join and get a return on their investment.
Yeah, so we'll take that it's 75 banks that are a part of CBAO or thereabouts, and that's the number that we've engaged with directly. Some of your banks have come to us and then walked away. Maybe I'm getting an unpaid commercial here. What are they missing? The ones that have engaged with us, I think that's an easy story to tell. But for the others, what are they missing, or what are we missing in servicing their desires, needs in a way that would build relationships?
Well, anytime you are working with leaders of organizations, and it doesn't matter if they're in the plumbing or electrical or manufacturing or law enforcement agency, the participant, the leader, has to be a willing participant in being evaluated and potentially exposed for their own personal strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's a very, very vulnerable action for some people to take on. And you have to be able to have thick skin to be able to go through that process, and not everybody does.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just too convicted in their beliefs or path or mission to pause, take an evaluation, and then go back at it again.
It's something I've always wondered about. There is an element of humility when a leader in an organization invites someone else to come in and help them with their leadership.
Correct. Even if you are a Division 1A football coach, that's a very vulnerable action. Even if you're a high school football coach, that's a very vulnerable action to say, I'm going to invite someone else from the outside who does not know anything about my industry to help evaluate me and my leadership skills and my team to help us get to the next level.
Right. We may come back there, but I want to talk about the future of community banking. You focused on local decision making. CBAO's objective is to, lead the industry. There's a lot of nuance in that statement that I'd be interested in unpacking at some point, and maybe we'll come back to that as well. But as you look at the next 5 years for community banking, or maybe the next 10 years, what do you see for the future of community banking in Ohio?
Innovation and adoption of new technologies, services, and especially as artificial intelligence comes on the scene is going to be really, really interesting. Over the next 5 and 10 years, I think the consolidation that our industry has faced will continue. There's a lot of reasons why it's there. Part of it is because of a vacancy or a void of leaders being present or available in our industry space. But also part of it is economies and efficiencies of scale. Now, we want to be able to have as many community banks that we have today as we will have in 10 years. But when we take a look at where that consolidation occurs, oftentimes is occurring unfortunately in the rural markets. And so when there is consolidation in those markets, they kind of get abandoned oftentimes, and then it leaves a void in those markets. So in Ohio, the trend for mergers and acquisitions has been behind the national average, right around 3%. And so the best we could do at this point is hope that it is minimized. But at the end of the day, free markets prevail. And now, if I may, I'd like to digress for a second.
Sure.
When we had our 45th annual convention in Cleveland in 2019, we took a number of our community bankers on a tour of Great Lakes Brewing Company, which is a large beer manufacturer and distributor right there in Cleveland, Ohio. And one of the things I had done in doing some research was I stumbled across an affiliated organization by acronym anyway, ICBA, Independent Craft Brewers of America. And if anyone was around in the 80s, there was a lot of beer wars, a lot of dogs on commercials, dogs and beer wars, taste great, less filling, and the rest. And there was a heavy, heavy consolidation in the beer industry to the point where there was only about 100 craft brewers left in America because of the large beer manufacturers and the public interest to those advertising campaigns that had been out there. But interesting enough, when there is a lack of choice and a lack of variety, market forces prevail and people started brewing craft beer in their basements again. And when we get back to the end of the 90s and even in the 2000s, the last I looked, there were over 10,000 craft brewers across America. And that number may even be higher now today. So there are ebbs and flows in the industry. It doesn't matter if it's banking or brewing beer. So market forces will prevail. And so while there is consolidation, and that has been an issue there for the last 50 years, at a certain point, we'll reach a tipping point and then we'll go back. Fortunately, Ohio is, I believe, second in the nation in de novo banks or new banks taking place in the market. And we've had 5 take launch here in Columbus, probably in the last 6 years now. So that is a sign that while there is consolidation, new people are coming together with new stakeholders to find a better way to do it for their local communities.
I appreciate what you said. I want to push back a little bit on that. Roughly a decade ago, if I remember the statistics correctly or the data that I watched, there were over 10,000 community banks in the United States, or maybe over 10,000 financial organizations in the United States, and we're somewhere around 1,200 now, if I remember the data. You would be more familiar, Aza. What is that number today?
Yeah, for community banks, I believe it's somewhere right now between 4,000 and 4,500 nationally.
Okay.
But you're right. About 10 years ago or more, it was probably in that 8 to 10,000 range. And if we go back even 20 years, it may have been 15 to 18,000.
So market forces, as you're talking about, that maybe move to expand the industry. There's a far cry. There's a huge difference between setting up a craft brewing operation in my basement and opening a bank. It is not, the barrier to entry is substantive. Mm-hmm. Financially, number one, regulatory wise, number two. And even then, if I'm familiar enough with what I think I am, the hand holding that the regulatory agencies provide during kind of an initial 2 to 3 year, let's make sure we got the training wheels on and you get going in a way that you need to get going. Does that environment need to change to make for a healthier industry, or does that environment the environment?
Well, changes to that environment would certainly help, right? Removing or minimizing or reducing the barriers to entry would certainly help. The key there is getting the right leaders in place from a regulatory or administrative perspective that are going to help foster that and till that garden and turn over the soil and plant a few seeds. So, yes, we can, as an industry, work and lobby and advocate to reduce the barriers to entry. But at the end of the day, a craft brewer is doing so, one, because they're creating a product that tastes good for a local community, but that they're getting that local community engaged in that vision of, hey, my friend brews this, right? And we're doing the exact same thing in the banking space. So we may have to gather investors to aggregate $20 or $25 million worth of capital to start a bank. But again, you're doing that with the vision, because you're selling the vision of what we can do better than everybody else that's already out there.
I want to go back to a couple of things you said about the next 5 years of community banking, innovation and adoption for technology and AI. I got it. You make kind of a backhanded comment about, if you want to talk to chatbots, is this a get on board because we're about generative AI and technology? Is this a get on board because if we don't, this is going to leave the station without us and we're going to be missing out? How do we sustain this? And I'm going to use a phrase from a very good friend of ours, Metamora State Bank in Sylvania. How do we sustain the personal touch in the days of high technology, high AI? And is that even necessary? There's a fair amount of at least conjecture. I won't say evidence, but conjecture that starting with millennials, Gen Z, and very soon Gen A, I don't need to go and see that bank president that's sitting in the lobby. I'll just hang out on my app and manage my money. Where's the opportunity and maybe the threat in all of that for community banking?
Certainly. Well, the opportunity in terms of engaging with AI or artificial intelligence is engaging it in a way that is going to streamline the process for greater efficiencies. But one of the core values for community bankers is the personal relationship. So with that personal relationship being that core value, our community as an industry is more inclined to engage that technology to create efficiencies, if you will, behind the curtain, but not to replace the personal relationship that exists with the consumer. At the end of the day, I talked earlier about 50 years ago and some of the founding principles why we were created, but as much as things change, they do stay the same. And at the end of the day, people still want to do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. That hasn't changed through the generations. And so whether it be generation X, Y, Z, or A, or whatever would be next, they want to know that someone is looking out for them. And so engaging in the the emerging technologies, I think, is certainly an opportunity for the industry. I think from a threat perspective, not engaging in it at all would certainly be a threat.
is this notion about personal relationships. By the way, I think you're right, but I'm going to be a contrarian for a moment. Is this wishful thinking on the part of the community banking industry because I've created an environment that is conducive to the way that I operate? Or is there evidence to suggest this is truly demand driven and that customers want that relationship? And by the way, relationships, I think you said love, trust, and what was the third element of that?
People that they know, they like, and they trust.
I like and I know and I trust you too, but we do most of our business digitally. It's a rare occasion that you and I are looking each other in the face as we are right now. So I could do all of that digitally. Is the industry at all in danger of concocting a solution or driving to a solution? Concocting sounds manipulative. Driving to a solution that suits them, but isn't necessarily what their customers are truly asking for.
Well, you actually just underscored one of the primary differences between what I would call the super regional banks or organizations and community banks, because community banks at their core value are going to, their decision-making process, their core decision-making process is to benefit the consumer, not to benefit the shareholder on Wall Street. And so while they may be embracing technologies and new innovations, they're doing it to improve the experience for their consumer, not because it creates a greater profit for the shareholder.
Shareholders on Wall Street do exist for folks like Bank of America, or I'll just leave it there because I'm going to miss a large national and then they're going to blackball me. But the shareholders for community banks don't typically sit on Wall Street. They sit in the homes of the communities in which they live. This independence, this fierce independence, can be linked back to ownership structures in many cases. I get that there's arguably a more intrinsic reward from seeing a bank thrive in the community where I live. But if I'm a shareholder, if I'm a family-owned bank, I still want to see that return on investment. Are you saying that it's just less pronounced? It's not that it's absent, but it's just less pronounced?
I would say that local shareholder is probably just going to be a little more patient.
Okay.
For that return on investment.
Okay. Second thing I want to go back to is this leadership availability. And I can't remember exactly how you characterize that nugget. The next 5 years. A little more vacancy, leadership availability. Tell me more about that, if you would.
Well, anytime we're going through the generations, and obviously boomers played a large part in our society post-World War II, it's well documented they're retiring at a pace of about 10,000 per day right now. So that creates a lot of opportunities in the marketplace for the next generation, but the leadership has to be there. Depending upon the industry, if in the community banking industry, we have a shortage of talent right now because there was not enough people coming into our industry 10 or 15 years ago, largely related to the financial crisis of 2007 and 8. Banks were in the news all the time, and it was not a good thing, but broadly the general public cast all banks together, and so therefore there was a talent drain of new talent coming into the marketplace. And now 15 years later, we're seeing that there is a gap of talent in our industry. And so that is oftentimes, unfortunately, one of the leading contributors to mergers and acquisitions.
Sure.
Because there is a shortage of talent that hasn't been in that space for the last 15 or 20 years.
Is the talent associated exclusively with the fact that a bank had a negative connotation by virtue of the financial downturn at the end of the 2007 and 8? Or is it more associated with the fact that, and the FDIC published these data probably 5, 6, 7 years ago now, that if I'm a community banker, I'm 40% more likely to be in a more rural area. So is it by virtue of the fact that I sit in a rural area where arguably the war for talent is waging someplace else like Columbus or Cleveland or Toledo, but I sit in Richwood, Ohio. Now, Richwood is is handy, relatively handy to Columbus, or Attica, Ohio, or Bucyrus, Ohio, or Mansfield, Ohio. I'm not in one of those population centers. So is that also part of the problem, or is it largely the issue of community banks just aren't attractive because they're part of the business and finance or banking and finance industry?
Yeah. A couple different things to touch on there. One, the talent's still out there in the marketplace. It just isn't we don't have enough of it in our space, right? But the second thing is largely for community bank. Well, there has been a large migration, probably for even 20 or 30 years now, of a migration of the population from rural America to the more dense urban metropolitan centers. And that's not unique to Ohio. That's been happening nationwide. Sure. So that is also a contributing factor. However, with the talent still out there, the community banks in particular just have to find new ways to be resourceful, to find that talent, and then to attract them to Hicksville or Attica or Bellevue or Marietta or Andover, Ohio, because there is a different quality of work-life balance in our Ohio communities. There is a different cost of living expenses. What you can buy an average home for in Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati is going to be very, very different in Delta or Hicksville or any of these other smaller rural communities. So if you're looking for a mature candidate that has leadership skills and they recognize and they appreciate that work-life balance, that I can have a professionally rewarding career where I make a difference in my market, in my community for an organization, it's available. But the banks have to do a better job of telling their story to attract that talent. And we have to start fishing in ponds that traditionally we have not fished in the past to find that talent.
Do you have any ideas on what ponds we ought to be going to and looking at a little harder?
Sure. First and foremost, from a recruiting perspective, I think it's imperative that recruiting be happening online with any number of online recruiting services. LinkedIn has been a fabulous one, just to name one, but also working with recruiters. And I would also say recruiters that specialize in bringing talent from a large metropolitan city to maybe a more rural market, because there's a lot of invaluable items that can be touched upon when bringing someone from a large market to a smaller market.
I've been harping on this very same thing. You and I are in violent agreement about this, tell better stories. Because inevitably what we find is when someone says, so tell me about why I should come and work for the bank, with a little tongue-in-cheek, maybe more than a little tongue-in-cheek, we'll go into character and say something about, well, Ezra and Zebediah were plowing a field in the 1800s and their mules bumped into each other and we decided we should cooperate and form a bank. That is not attractive to a young professional coming into an industry. But I share that where these younger generations are arguably, maybe stereotypically more purpose-driven. As a financial entity in the banking and finance industry, arguably nothing's more purposeful than working in a community bank. Nothing. I can drive down the street and I can see that business that I helped get started. I can see that house that I helped a young family acquire that allowed them to begin their journey as a family together. I can see that wedding occurring at the small chapel in my community, and I was the bank that provided them the funding for the rings that they just exchanged in a very traditional sense. Those are the stories that get my attention and that we deserve to tell better. I think that community banking as well, not to get off my soapbox too quickly, the financial response of our government to COVID and the shutdown, that water was carried by community banks in a large measure. The larger banks couldn't possibly be bothered with it. And that sounds disparaging, but that's my opinion. But things like the PPP and other financial instruments to enable organizations like mine to survive and then thrive. That was your industry's contribution, for which I think that we are not as grateful as we should be.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Steve. The PPP could not have physically been delivered without the community banks, which is all the evidence that we need to minimize a regulatory environment that is too oppressive, remove barriers to entry for more de novo activity nationwide. Because if we want to have a healthy financial economic system for all of America, the best way we can do that is by having thousands upon thousands of community banks coast to coast. In some countries nationwide where there has been consolidation, they may only have 3 or 5 banks. Well, that doesn't give the consumer enough choice to take their business elsewhere if they're not getting the attention that they deserve.
Yeah.
So community banks are absolutely essential. Many financial planners say diversify your retirement holdings. Don't have one stock. Have a mutual fund where you might have 200 or 500 stocks. Well, we're doing the exact same thing by having thousands upon thousands of community banks nationwide. We're protecting our economic system from the rest of the world, and it's stronger as a result.
Of course, I want to go back to this storytelling again. LinkedIn is you're right. LinkedIn has proven to be a important source for a broader net to cast and try to find this talent. I get that. I'm also reminded that because of the more rural nature of community banks and the nature, the types of industries, areas, geographies that you find yourself in, that there are unique personality characteristics that are attracted to those kinds of places. Not everybody is going to be happy in Attica, Ohio, or Tiffin, or Findlay, or Fostoria in that belt across there. Some years ago, we did some analysis on that issue and began looking at some of the small town, regional, more rural economic developers to try to steal from their playbook. And how do they attract business to these areas? Findlay, Ohio is a good example when you get a couple of major mega national organizations that had their world headquarters in Findlay, Ohio, and you'd think, why? Among the drivers is spade-ready property, and they have a lot of that there. But there's also the small town feel and the main street and the vibrant restaurant scene and all of those kinds of things that are very, very attractive to young professionals that are looking to not have to lock their door. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, but not have to lock their door, not have to navigate a 45-minute commute in heavy traffic, not have to wonder who their neighbor is, not have to, play essentially ignorant to the local politics because I don't know. They're so far disconnected from me that I don't get it. There's a lot to be said about rural America that community banking should be leveraging. We're in the leadership business, so I'd like to spend the time that we've got left chatting a bit about what you see as the leadership challenges that we need to overcome in order to get through these next 5 to 10 years.
First and foremost, it's going to be investing in the next generation of talent. Many of the Gen Xers that are working their way into leadership roles, for a lot of them, they are already towards the mid to end. By the time they ascend to many of the leadership roles, they're already looking at retirement because they've been waiting for so long. And so even for them, it's investing in, while they may have just recently moved into a lot of those roles, it's investing in that next generation behind them to backfill so that leadership is ready. And it doesn't matter if it's community banking or, again, any other industry.
Xers, when you get right down to it, first of all, if you believe in that birthday banding stuff, we could have that on another conversation. But believe in the birthday banding and the way that Xers are characterized. In 5 years, Xers are 65. The oldest Xers are 65.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
That's exactly what you're talking about. Boomers, by the way, you mentioned boomers retiring at $10,000 a day. True. There is some evidence to suggest that boomers are coming back to the workforce because they haven't found retirement to be all that in a bag of Doritos. So here they come back, which I think even makes harder the task that you just laid out. As a rule, agree or disagree, this is an observation from an outsider to your industry looking in, but we spend a fair amount of time with your banks. If I'm a young professional, maybe in my 30s, looking, and I've been around a bit, I look up and I see a very flat, very stable senior leadership team that is, especially if they're now engaging increasingly millennials, 15 to 20 years left in their professional lives. And I think to myself, holy crap, where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
What's your thought about kind of getting stuck in the middle in what appears to be a pretty flat hierarchy across most of these institutions?
Well, if I'm speaking to someone that's in that 30s and they're kind of looking at where do I go? Where do I find a place? Because if they're inclined to ascend and do more and have a greater degree of influence in the organization, I think first and foremost, they need to have that conversation with their leadership internally to find out, what is my path? Maybe I've been in deposit operations. Do I need to move over to commercial lending? Do I need to move over to residential lending? So I have a broader experience so that I am more equipped to be prepared. Do I need to move into the accounting side and figure out call reports and monthly filings and that sort of thing? So I think they need to have that conversation and discussion with leadership and find out what is their path. Are they being considered? And the best thing you can do is have the conversation.
Well, you and I will both remember fondly a 2017 conference that we did in Cincinnati,
mm-hmm.
where we, maybe not directly, but I think indirectly, we're inviting the conversation between boomers and millennials about their future growth. And the boomers, to my memory, I don't know how you remember it, you can tell me. The boomers, while it's easy for us to say, I would invite the conversation, the boomers didn't seem all that interested in having it.
They did not.
What's your advice to executives, to the CEOs of your banks? You've got them all in a room together. In this case, you're going to get all 150 CEOs from every community bank, even the ones that are not yet members of the association. You've invited all of these young professionals to go and seek out a conversation with their leadership. And the one data point that we have as evidence is maybe they're not all that receptive to having it.
Correct.
What are you going to slam your fist on the table with those CEOs to say about that?
Yeah, I might not slam my fist, but I would definitely have some thought-provoking comments. First and foremost, a lot of times, and it doesn't matter if it's a smaller community bank or even a larger community bank, someone may have ascended to that CEO role because they were very good at their job. Maybe they were on the lending side of the house. Maybe they were on the financial side of the house. Wherever they came from, pathing-wise, inside the organization, they were very good at what they did. My challenge would be is once you ascend to that CEO role, your job description has changed. And now you are in, first and foremost, the people business. And it's very important to go around from office to office, branch to branch, and connect with the people and motivate them, inspire them, get their feedback, get their opinions. How could we do this differently? What are you hearing from the customers? What are the emerging trends that we need to focus on? So oftentimes CEOs want to stay in the lane that they are most familiar with because they were good at lending. And so while they're in the CEO role, they still want to do lending too. But my challenge would be to spend more time with the people.
I couldn't agree with you more. I might amend that, though. They've always been in the people business. They got distracted into thinking they're in the banking business. And especially in community banks. If you want to go back to the differentiator in community banks to the other financial institutions in this country, community banks are in the people business. They're in the relationship business, first and foremost. And so it's almost a little antithetical for a community banker, in my judgment, a little antithetical for a community banker to have to scratch their head and finally realize that when they're in leadership role, they're in the people business. They've always been the people business. Now they need to get out of the way and let the technical experts in their organization do the thing that they were hired to do and focus on the development. I agree with you, Aza. And yet, what would you say to the smaller community banks? You have some of those where the CEO is a necessary role, but they're also a contributing roll up their sleeves kind of member of the staff. But not for the CEO, the work of the bank may not get done. What do you do in that circumstance?
Well, I think that comes down to something that we are all challenged with in our career, whether it be early, mid-career, or even late, is for that person that likes to roll up their sleeves, or they have no objection to grabbing a shovel and digging in the ditch with everybody else. The key is, I think one of the challenges that I see, and some do it better than others, but I think delegation and proper delegation is a challenge for a lot of folks, because they actually enjoy digging in the ditch with their colleagues and their peers. There's a sense of fellowship and camaraderie there. And so it's something that is known. They're comfortable with it. They're familiar with it. And so, but the challenge is learning how to delegate just a little bit more so that you can stay at that 30,000 foot view to make sure that if you are in the ditch digging, everyone is digging in a straight line according to the plan, so you don't end up someplace where you didn't want to be.
Sure. Is there one penultimate leadership imperative that you can think of that we need to really be focusing on in the next, again, 5 to 10 years?
I think the biggest thing is identifying your culture and what you are and what you want to be. Because at the end of the day, it's human behavior, but everyone wants to be part of a winning team. I'm wearing my Buckeye paraphernalia. You're wearing your Kansas City Chiefs paraphernalia. We all want to be a part of a winning team. And so the only process that works is the one that you work. So if there's a culture at this community bank and they're thriving, well, that's great, but it's an extension of the leader and the rest of the team being united in that vision. That may not be replicatable for someone else in another city because you have a different culture.
Right.
The key is identifying your culture, who you are, who you want to be, where you want to go, and then sharing that vision with the rest of the team to say, we're pointed in this direction. We want you in the boat, but I need you to be rowing in the same direction as everybody else.
Right. I find about culture, and we would say it a little bit differently, but it's such a wide, broad topic that there's plenty of room for maneuver in here. No one in the community banking industry is driving around, snatching up people in blackened out vans and driving them to their banks and coercing them into working for them. You came to join me.
Yeah.
So this is who we are. This is how we operate. You came to join me. I'm interested in how we might be able to morph the experience to better suit your professional development. But the culture of the bank's the culture of the bank. Darn it.
Yeah. So I would say, maybe said another way, status quo is not good enough.
It never has been, which speaks a little bit to something that I read Klaus Schwab said. Klaus Schwab, for someone that may not be familiar, is the founder and CEO of the World Economic Forum. And he's talking about, in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which he argues is the confluence of meta trends from things like 3D printing or data mining and data analytics, on-demand biotech, fill in the blank. But these things have come together in a way that is really, really fascinating. Maybe generative AI is a byproduct of that. Some of these things that are coming together that are providing us tools that we can use in our businesses. He argues that the leader imperative in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, and the one necessary for us to encounter and deal best with this fourth industrial revolution, is the concept of adaptability. We have to be able to adapt. When you're talking about developing leaders, Aza, I'd be interested in your notion here. We tend, let me say something first. Community banks, generally old-fashioned and traditional. What would you say to that?
I would say probably more traditional.
Traditional.
can be perceived as old-fashioned, but it may not necessarily be an accurate perception.
Fair. That's fair. Is traditional and adaptable, are those oxymoronic?
No.
Okay. Because I don't think it's intuitive necessarily that those can be joined at the hip and work hand in hand. But when we think about the nature of community banking and adaptability, and I'm in that one stoplight town with 3 options to buy lunch, adaptability doesn't present itself necessarily as the foremost characteristic. And yet this next generation of talent who will be the leaders of our banks in this fourth industrial revolution, and if Schwab is right, we can't be developing them to do what we do. You made the point that once I got into this role as a senior leader in a community bank, I have a different collection of responsibilities. Well, that collection of responsibilities is going to be different in 5-10 years. Therefore, if we're developing junior leaders, the next generation of leaders in the way that we were developed, we're going to miss the mark. What do you say to that?
There are early adopters in those small markets. I've seen them. You've seen them. You've worked with many of them.
Sure.
So it's out there and it's available. And it goes back to one of my quotes that I've used with my team many times. If you're coasting, you're probably rolling downhill. So you always, and it underscores the need for adaptability. What was a need for our members even 5 years ago is dramatically different than what the needs are today.
Sure.
It's not a fixed point in time. It's always moving. It's always evolving. Your friend that we worked with in the past, Les, shared with me a variety of aphorisms, but the only constant is change. So you have to be adaptable. It's absolutely imperative. Absolutely imperative.
I think that's a fair place to end. Aza, I truly appreciate you making the time, exposing a bit of your industry that we both are very, very fond of. You live there. I just get to visit. Community banking in Ohio, just as a commercial. There are probably 3 or 4 kind of niches in the United States where community banking is thriving and particularly well organized. Ohio is among those states, thanks both to the members of the community banking industry in the state, but certainly contributed to mightily by CBAO. So good on you, good on your staff. We'll look forward to seeing you guys again sometime soon. And I really appreciate the thought and the insight.
Steve, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today, and hope to see you again when you're traveling to Buckeye State.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on Mission Ignition. We hope you'll tune in again soon and make this one of your go-to sources for plain, practical thinking around the contemporary issues you, your leaders, and your organization are dealing with. In the meantime, please check us out on our website at www.teamcatalyzer.com and on LinkedIn. Remember, regardless of what business we're in, we're primarily in the people business. Now time to get out there and ignite some great.